didn't ask to get made. I didn't ask to be torn apart and put back together over and over and turned into some little monster.
Rocket, no one's calling you a monster.
He called me vermin. She called me rodent.
That one didn't age quite so well.
No! God, please, no! No!
Today we're talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I went in with incredibly low expectations just because, well, lately the MCU movies have not been that good.
And at least I died an Avenger.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah, no, you're in.
When you look at the screenwriting, when you look at the special effects, even when you look at the performances at the end of the day. Even Black Panther Wakanda Forever, like I almost completely forgot about it just a couple of months later. This is not a good sign. So I went into Guardians of the Galaxy being like, I'm just looking to be entertained. I'm not looking to see a masterpiece. This is a comic book movie and literally cannot be worse than Shazam! Fury of the Gods or even Black Adam. So those are the expectations that I had going in, and it was really hard not to be spoiled at the end of the day because they're actually pushing the marketing almost too hard when it comes to Guardians. There are so many trailers out there and it's really hard not to spoil the action sequences, but most of all the emotional resonance that we have in this movie here, all the character journeys that the Guardians are going through. It is very clear when you just look at the marketing material, and I think it's a bit of a shame because like this movie doesn't really surprise you at the end of the day, even though it is really well executed and it is really fun, and I actually gave it a really high score of 4.5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd.
We'll all fly away together into the forever and beautiful sky.
At the end of the day, it's not surprising, there are not that many plot twists, but it is also incredibly refreshing and it's incredibly fun, and it's also incredibly sad, and I almost teared up. And I honestly don't remember the last time that I teared up for an MCU movie. It must have been probably WandaVision or even Spider-Man No Way Home. If you think about that scene where Andrew Garfield is basically just jumping in to save Zendaya.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. Are you okay?
It's the only scene that breaks me every single time. But anyways, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is without a doubt one of the most entertaining MCU movies since Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but it also has stakes. You kind of have a feeling that these characters might die at the end of every single action sequence, and they actually play with that quite a lot, specifically with Nebula, mostly because she's a weird android slash cyborg hybrid. Basically, it's almost impossible to kill her, and there are so many times where you get like her bones are gonna snap, or where you get her almost like dying, and then the movie just gives her a chance to like heal herself. But those moments work quite incredibly at the end of the day, and I love that James Gunn is taking risk when it comes to this movie. It really feels like he's just committed to these characters so much, and at the end of the day, this trilogy is one of the best MCU trilogies that I've ever seen, mostly because it is character driven. It's not concept driven, it's not like cameo driven like other trilogies, if you think about Spider-Man, or even if you think about Captain America, because for example the third movie in the Captain America trilogy is Captain America Civil War, which is basically not a Captain America movie when you think about it. This is the most coherent trilogy that the MCU has ever done since probably Iron Man, even though it has definitely bigger stakes and also more imagination at the end of the day. Because if there's one thing we can say about this movie, it's that it's just so beautiful to look at, but it's also very ridiculous when it wants to, and it's really funny because because it feels like it was borrowing so many of the special effects ideas from Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, but it just made them better, and they actually made sense within the plot and within the universe of the Guardians themselves. It kind of feels like the same people who were working on Quantumania ended up working like the day after on this movie here, and if you've seen the movie already, you'll know what I mean. But this is why they actually work. The special effects are actually breathtaking. This is probably one of the best looking Marvel movies that I've seen since Eternals. It's a different look, of course, because there is a lot of special effects, there is a lot of green screens, but at the end of the day, James Gunn manages always to ground us in the scene and within the landscapes as well. And maybe it's also because most of the main characters are either CGI characters like Rocket, for example, or they are a mix of practical effects and CGI. And that's maybe why they blend in so much with like space opera slash sci-fi landscapes, and that's why this movie ended up working so much for me.
Well, what I'm trying to say...
Peter, you know this is an open line, right?
What?
We're listening to everything you're saying.
And it is painful.
And you're just telling me now?
We were hoping it would stop on its own.
There are so many incredible action sequences as well, and this is honestly like my John Wick. There is one scene which is basically one of those fake out long takes, which is so beautiful. There are so many weird aliens like dying and being decapitated, and our main characters like jumping and doing incredible stunts that like are impossible in real life. But that's why it works, and that's why it's so fun. If there is one thing I can say about the John Wick franchise, at the end of the day, it still remains anchored on Earth and with the laws of gravity as well, while the Guardians movie kind of allows us to go completely insane and to kind of borrow all of those action stunts and to turn them into something very colorful, very funny, and at the end of the day very creative, because it's something that looks different. It still manages to feel fresh just because of the incredible creature designs that are featured here. If there is one thing that I loved about this movie, it's the characters, the side characters as well, but also the notion of creating a home, because basically if you've seen the Christmas special, you know that the Guardians have established Nowhere as their headquarters, but it's not just a headquarters. It's not like basically the Avengers headquarters where it feels like it's just empty always with people in suits just walking around, and sometimes there is a superhero that happens to walk by. Nowhere is an actual city. Nowhere is an actual planet. It's an actual community of people who are trying to band together to survive. It is like made out of incredibly weird characters, probably like the misfits of the universe, meaning that it's all the people that feel like outcasts, maybe rejected by other planets, other crews, and their families as well, and they banded together on this weird planet to basically survive and to have a decent life as well. And you care for most of them as well. There are so many incredible scenes with Cosmo, for example, and the character played by Sean Gunn, who has now inherited basically the powers of Yondu, and it works. It doesn't feel like it's just there to make funny jokes, the kind of like one-liners that we're used to when it comes to Marvel movies. It just feels like these characters exist, and you believe that they're actually acting true to their own personalities, and they're not just saying things just because we want to have a laugh. Things that you might have seen with Quantumania, things that you might have seen with Love and Thunder, where everything is turned into a joke to the point that we can't take any of it seriously. But even the side characters like Sean Gunn's character, for example, ends up having a small character arc that was actually teased at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And if there is one thing I can say, and I can actually applaud James Gunn for his screenwriting skills, it's the fact that this movie wraps everything up perfectly. It wraps up all the things that were teased in Volume 2, so the Adam Warlock stuff, the ego stuff, the relationship with Mantis that was also established in the Christmas special, and it creates links, of course, with other movies like Endgame and Infinity War when it comes to the relationship in between Gamora and Peter Quill.
Whoever it was that you were in love with, it sounds more like her.
Her? That's ridiculous.
Do not bring me into this.
Knock it off!
What? Just never noticed how black your eyes were.
They were replaced by my father as a method of torture.
He
He picked a pretty set.
But also small things like, do you remember, for example, that Guardians of the Galaxy, the first movie that came out in 2014, starred a dancing sequence at the beginning but also at the very end of the movie. That's how we got introduced to the main character and the main characters just in general. And I love that James Gunn committed so much to these kind of silly dancing sequences that he reproduced them in the second movie, but that he used them almost for narrative and emotional reasons in this third movie here. Dancing almost becomes like a character arc for some of the main characters here, because it kind of represents that idea of like being part of the family, because dancing is something that you do with your family, with your friends, with other people. It's not really something you can do on your own. At the end of the day, even though it looks silly, it's incredibly fun. If we want to talk about the soundtrack, since it's related to the dancing part as well, the soundtrack is really good, but sometimes it almost went into montage, like almost like MTV music video style, where I was like, you're literally cutting out interesting dialogues that could be happening with just music. But I think this has to do with almost like what Guardians of the Galaxy established at the very beginning, almost like 10 years ago. The idea basically that the soundtrack is kind of like reflecting and mirroring all of the emotional things that the main characters are going through, and it is kind of like guiding them through like a journey as well. And it's something that it's been replicated since then in so many blockbuster movies. If you think about Baby Driver, for example, that's an excellent example, but that is actually a good movie. But you've seen so many other like mediocre action movies that try to do that as well. They try to replicate the James Gunn way of making movies, and that's maybe why the soundtrack didn't impact me as much in this third movie here, mostly because now it's almost become part of the norm when it comes to those kind of action movies. But it's still really good. There are so many incredible songs that I had never heard before or that I completely forgot about, and that stand out so much just because of the action sequences that go along with it. I think it's safe to say we can go into spoiler mode right now and discuss into details all of the characters, all of the plot twists, so that we can actually deconstruct this movie a little bit more, so that I can explain why I loved it so much, specifically from a screenwriting perspective. Let's start by talking about the characters, the relationships that have been established in between them, and how this is like a perfect send-off movie. I kind of feel like Marvel is almost like shooting itself on the foot by creating like such a perfect quirky family movie that at the end of the day all of the other ones are not gonna feel as genuine. If you think about the Fantastic Four movie that has been announced, but also Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was kind of designed like a family of superheroes kind of movie, but it didn't work at all, mostly because every single character just didn't have any personality at all, and even when it comes to their skill set, they just kind of were copy and paste versions of the same person, which is not the case with the Guardians of the Galaxy. All of them have very different backstories, very different personalities, and they stay coherent from the first movie to the third one, with one exception, the small little scene that you can see in Thor: Love and Thunder, where basically the Guardians are just treated as one-off jokes.
Is he leaving us forever?
I'm putting them down.
Me too. No, it's not working. It's not charged. Well, maybe you need to find the charger. Whoa. You okay?
Yeah, bro, all good.
And it's weird, and it needs to be uncanonized at the end of the day, because they don't even mention it in this volume here, if you think about it. It would have been so easy to make a joke about like, I wonder where Thor is right now. It's really clear that James Gunn didn't want to do that, because he actually didn't find that whole idea of Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy getting together that interesting at the end of the day, or that stimulating as well. If you want to address all the Rocket stuff, all the different flashbacks and the character development that he goes through, actually, that particular story there was supposed to be like a short film that was actually going to be released separately, and then he decided to include it into volume 3 and to make it like the most important part of volume 3, where it's basically driving the narrative from the beginning to the end. That's why I say that this movie has stakes, because it's not about saving the universe, it's about saving your friend who has 48 hours until he dies, and there are so many kind of like side villains that are gonna try to stop our main characters to achieve that goal, and one of them is Adam Warlock, which we saw at the end of volume 2. It's kind of interesting because I think that comic book fans are gonna find Adam Warlock incredibly annoying and the perfect kind of representation of what Marvel doesn't do well.
I I am the great mighty Pooh, and I'm going to throw my shit at you.
Which is kind of like hyping things up and committing to an incredible, majestic, like almost godly character. They have to take a piss out of it, like they can't take something too seriously unless maybe it's Thanos. So Adam Warlock is one of those characters that nobody takes seriously, and I think that it works perfectly within this movie here. It maybe doesn't work when you look at the comics, it maybe doesn't work when you look at what was established at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but I think it works perfectly within the franchise because everybody's stupid in this franchise. Everybody is incredibly flawed, and when you think about it, the characters who end up creating Adam Warlock, they pretend to be like this incredible perfect society, but they're incredibly egotistic, they're incredibly dumb at the end of the day in a very human way, and it makes sense actually. They would end up creating a being that is not closer to perfection than they are, it's actually stupider. And the reason that they find to explain that is because they took him out of his like chamber too fast, so he came out basically with the IQ of a child and the power level of a titan, for example.
I don't have hands. Are we the baddies?
But I think that the actor does an incredible well job at making us care about Adam Warlock. There is only like one scene where it was kind of confusing what he was trying to do, and it's when the planet is exploding and he just like starts running away towards like his mother. I didn't really understand whether he was trying to save her or he was trying to kill her. It was not really clear within the context of his performance, or maybe it has to do with the editing. There was like maybe a scene missing or something like that. I didn't understand that part, but that was the only thing. I really liked his redemption arc at the end of the day in the final act, even though I was not really into the fake out death that they do with Peter Quill. It would have been interesting for him to sacrifice himself, but at the end of the day I knew that Marvel was not gonna do that, so it was kind of weird to just look at him die and then come back to life almost immediately.
Are you yawning in the middle of this while I'm breaking it down? Huh? Did you hear what I said?
Stop listening after you said we need a plan.
But I'm kind of glad that at least they decided to stop with the facial injury that happened because he was basically into open space for like a couple of seconds, because otherwise the scene would have felt even more weightless, as if there was no consequences to just being in the middle of space without any kind of protection. So I like that part. When it comes to Rocket, I really liked all the flashbacks that I talked about before, and his backstories and his relationship with the main villain as well, that I'm gonna address quite soon as well. If there is one thing I can criticize about this film, and it's the only thing that really bothered me, is the fact that there is no actual in-movie narrative explanation for why the flashbacks are happening. I feel like the fact that he's in a coma, it's not like a good explanation, mostly because they seem to be happening at random moments just to fill up time, and I feel like the movie needed to give us a bit more.
Someday, I'm gonna make great machines that fly. And me and my friends are gonna go flying together into the forever and beautiful sky.
Maybe do a thing where he's kind of revisiting all of those memories with someone, and he has to make a choice whether to sacrifice himself, whether to just lay down and die because he's suffered so much throughout his life, or because of his guilt that he was not able to save his first friends, or to fight for something better, for something larger, to fight for his family, his newfound family, so the Guardians. And I kind of feel like they rushed that part in the last flashback, where basically it really feels like we are in the void, in the Harry Potter void that you see also in the Deathly Hallows, and it feels like he has to make a choice, but he doesn't really make a choice. He just decides to die, and then his friend is like, oh no, it's not your moment, and he's snapped back to life. It's weird. It's weird. Those flashbacks, the way they were put together within the story, they still feel a bit out of place, and they're just missing something to make them even more coherent. And if you want to talk about the High Executioner, a lot of people have been criticizing the High Executioners when it comes to his motives, when it comes to the way that he's just one of those big bads that want to like reshape the universe, kind of like Ego wanted to do as well, kind of like Thanos. But I think there is enough different things about him that make him stand out. First of all, the idea that he wants to make everything more perfect, he wants to create the perfect society. It is very clear that he's doing that because of a lack within himself, a kind of emotional work that he's not doing from a psychological, therapeutic critic perspective, and that's why he needs to create perfection, because he finds that he's not perfect on his own. And maybe that's where the movie just needed to exploit that a little bit more to make us understand like where he was coming from, what his origin story was as well, and why he felt that need. But I think because of the scenes that we get, we still understand that's why he's so obsessed about perfection. And I also like the idea that at the end of the day, he's not trying to conquer new worlds. He's literally just like creating new societies and putting them on these planets. He's getting inspired by different things. He's kind of like an artist at the end of the day. He's not really like trying to kill other people at the end of the day, or at least that's not what they tell us when it comes to the film. For example, if you look at Counter-Earth, there is nothing signaling us that he kind of like decimated all the beings on that planet before he actually put his society on it. You know what I mean? So of course what he does is incredibly bad, because he's creating basically new forms of intelligence, wiping them out, and it's all related to his ego at the end of the day, whether these are perfect or not. And it's very subjective, because his definition of perfection seems to be very related to intelligence and not looks specifically. Because if you look at Counter-Earth, for example, the animal society that he's created there looks incredibly weird, and I find it incredibly funny also that we actually get to go back to Earth, but it's not Earth, it's Counter-Earth, which kind of looks like this 70s/80s version of Earth, of course with weird animal creatures, and it comes with all the bad stuff that was going on in the 70s and 80s as well when it comes to like the opioids epidemic and stuff like that, a lot of bullying. And it's really funny that like he doesn't notice that, because he's so focused on intelligence, he's not really focused on creating a society that works. He's not clever enough to be able to do that. But anyways, I was saying that it's so interesting that we end up going on Counter-Earth, because this is one of the things that I hate the most about the MCU. It's the fact that we always go back to Earth. If you look at Thor, there are so many movies where you end up going to Earth for no reason whatsoever, and Earth really sucks. I've said this in a lot of different videos and critiques of other MCU movies. Earth doesn't look interesting, and I'm really tired to be on it.
The Earth sucks.
So of course, for the Guardians of the Galaxy movie to finally go back to Earth, but it's not actually Earth, it's like a weird looking version of Earth that looks very bland at the end of the day, mostly because he's inspired himself by like the art and the ambition of humans to create like the most bland society ever. I really liked that. I thought it was really interesting just because of that critique that we all have when it comes to previous MCU movies. I am kind of sad because now that the Guardians movie are completely done, even though it is mentioned that Star-Lord will come back, and I still don't understand why he's coming back, because he's the least interesting of the entire cast. It kind of feels like there is like a big hole in the MCU right now for that kind of space opera fun stuff. The Marvel's trailer, for example, signaled that we're gonna go back to Earth. It's gonna be a back and forth. And the other movies that they have announced, there is nothing that looks exactly like this, and it's a bit sad. I think we're gonna be missing a lot the Guardians. But at the end of the day, I'm really happy for what James Gunn decided to do with the final act, where basically he just finished up all the character arcs of these beautiful characters in ways that made sense. If you look at Mantis, it's incredibly interesting, of course, for her to go on her own and to find herself, because as she said in the movie, she spent her entire life working for Ego, and then she worked for the Guardians of the Galaxy. She never actually worked for herself. Then you look at the Gamora kind of Peter Quill relationship that they started to build on in this movie. It was really interesting how Gamora was like incredibly like aggressive, but for very good reasons, of course, towards Peter Quill, saying that it doesn't matter whether Peter Quill was actually so in love with Gamora, he should find something else that like gives him meaning and gives him purpose in his life, because she can't be his entire reason for surviving and for being, you know. And it really sucks, and it's something that is represented as romantic in a lot of like romantic comedies, but also in action movies as well, where two people are like so in love with each other that they kind of like don't exist outside of their romantic love.
I miss you so much. And maybe if you open yourself up to it, there's a possibility.
I don't think so, Quinn.
Quill.
Quill.
And that's exactly what like Gamora was criticizing and what James Gunn was criticizing with the entire like subplot when it comes to the romance, and it worked perfectly. The idea that Gamora managed to create a new family with the Ravagers is incredibly cool. The idea that Peter Quill would leave the Guardians and finally give the title of captain to Rocket, really good character development that dates back to the first movie where they used to argue all the time about who was the captain and who got to drive the spaceship. I really like what they did with Drax as well, the idea that he's not a destroyer anymore and that he's changed so much since the first movie. He needs to find some peace and he needs to basically be a leader for this new community because he's a father, that's what he's good at. And I really love his character arc, even though it was really small and it basically had to do with being taken seriously by the other members of the Guardians. And this entire movie is all about the Guardians kind of like finally understanding what they are and what they bring to the team as well as unique people at the end of the day. And it's not just about like fighting skill sets and stuff like that. They all have different personalities that bring something to the team, and this movie was about developing all of that. So not only they would be able to work together, which they've shown that they can do in previous movies as well, but they'd actually understand each other at a very deep level. And I found it incredible how James Gunn really got so many incredible performances from all of these actors and performance here, whether it is Bradley Cooper's voice when it comes to the acting of Rocket. I feel like the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is without a doubt some of the best work that Chris Pratt has ever done, especially because he gets to show a lot of range. He gets to be really funny, he gets to be an action lead as well, but he also gets to be very intense. If you just look at the relationship that was built with Ego, so his father, but also the relationship that he has built with Rocket within the final volume of this trilogy, and it's just heartbreaking. The moment when he breaks down, when he thinks that Rocket might be dying, Chris Pratt really sells the shit out of that moment, and it works just because of the performances. And that's why I love this movie at the end of the day, because everyone was so committed to their characters, to the universe. It really feels like we are looking at the Guardians of the Galaxy. We're not looking at people standing in the middle of like a dome surrounded by green screen. We're not looking at people who are trying to create cameos and hints to future movies and stuff like that. No, we're actually looking at characters going through interesting things and going into new adventures. I really like the fact that we get a scene with Rocket and adult Groot at the end and the new Guardians of the Galaxy. The new Guardians look incredibly silly, but that's the point, I think. It kind of reminds me of the weird thing that they did in Thor Love and Thunder, where basically like Thor ends up fighting with children, but it doesn't really make sense for his character, I think, because it was not signaled at all throughout his entire arc that he needed to be nicer to children and he wanted to be a father. It made no sense, but it makes really sense for Rocket to be in a team like that because he's someone who kind of like used to look at people through their fighting skill sets. He used to be very judgy of others. So for him to end up being a captain of a team of such weird characters, including like a dog, a weird creature, child, and a tree, like it's insane when you think about it, but that's all the character development that he's been through, and that's why he's able to be the perfect captain for that specific team. And I really like also all the message about like saving animals at the end of the day. It was like another subplot that was incredibly hard to watch when you look at all the animal cruelty and the weird experiments that the High Executioner was working on throughout the entire movie. So moments of like incredible cuteness and so many moments of incredible like just gnarly stuff. If you just look at War Pig, for example, it just looks like he's in pain and it was really hard to look at. So I'm really glad that they actually made the villains really stand out at the end of the day and they looked incredibly disgusting. Same thing goes when they go to OrCorp and they try to steal information to save Rocket. All of the suits, all of the design of OrCorp is so incredibly weird and gnarly, and it worked really well. And I thought that Nathan Fillion was incredibly funny, and I'm really glad that he was there as well. I think this movie also commits quite a lot to its violence and to having more stakes. The moment, for example, where basically the High Executioner is unmasked and you just look at his just disgusting face, which kind of like reminds me of Red Skull as well, and just the camera lingers on it to make you understand how he must be feeling, how disgusted of himself he must be feeling, and how he's trying to compensate by trying to create even more perfect beings. It's really interesting, and I really love that this film didn't compromise for anyone and for anything, and that's why it worked so well at the end of the day. movie. It just feels like a James Gunn movie in the way that Doctor Strange really felt like a Sam Raimi movie as well.
Okay, I love you. Bye-bye.
Anyways, those are all the thoughts that I have about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. For me, it's an incredible recommendation. Go and see it at the cinema because it's a true spectacle. Whether you are a sci-fi fan or just a Guardians fan, or even if an MCU fan, you will find it really entertaining and really fun, mostly because it doesn't really feel like a superhero movie. It just feels like the end of an interesting journey for characters that you've known for at least 10 years. If you liked this video, last week I released a really cool double review of the movie Evil Dead Rise and also Beau is Afraid, and I found some interesting links in between them, even though they are completely different movies, and I really think that you should check it out because I think you might enjoy it. Anyways, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single like that you drop will go to all of the Rocket incredibly cute and also weird looking animal friends. So I think one is called Floor, one is called Teeth, and the other one is called Lillian. They're all incredibly cute and they deserve our love and appreciation. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
Back in the 90s, I was in a very famous TV show.
You always were a brother to me.
I was? I was.
Da 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 da.